Hi everybody and welcome to today's video, and this is the final video, and my apologies for releasing this a little bit later than I anticipated, but it is what it is. So let me jump straight into it. In order to achieve this, I will take you through the materials. I'm not going to recreate the materials one by one, simply because there's not too many of them, but some of them can be a little bit at first glance that might look a little bit complicated. In fact, they're really not. It's just breaking it down into bite-sized chunks, so it kind of makes sense once I hopefully explain it to you in the best way that I can. And stick around to the end of the video, because I will be showing you full screen screenshots, and you can pause the video there and duplicate the materials exactly as I show them to you in this video. So to start off with, I'm going to first of all show you the images that I used, because there are 3 images that I've used on this particular model. And the first one is clearly the main image on the label, essentially. So you've got this one here, and we have one also for here, this control thing here. I'll call it a control thing. So you've got I'm using a normal map here to give it that kind of raised look. You can see just there, recesses, and also the color. So there's that. And finally, on the underside, we have this little label for the 20 bottle caps sale thing just there. So let me show you what those images look like, and I'll make those available to you to download. So have a look at the link in the description. And here are the images that I used on that model. So starting from the left, this is the control wheel. This is the alpha channel, the decal. I call it controls decal, and it's a transparent PNG. So you notice the background there is this dark grey color, which is the same as over here. That's not in the image. It's purely a transparent image. And I use that as for the color on the wheel. This one over here in the middle is obviously the normal map, and to give it those recessed those looks and feels. So it's a very basic normal map. I created this as a grayscale. If you create this as a grayscale image and then bring that if you search online for normal map generator, you can normally find something that is free. That's what I did, and I can't remember which website I used, sadly, sorry about that, but there are plenty out there. So upload your grayscale image and it will convert that to a normal map for you. A top tip there is start your image with a 50% grey, mid-grey, because that is essentially 0, i.e. flat area. Everything else above and below that grey area, i.e. towards white and towards black, will give you the recesses or the higher levels within your normal map. So use that as a guide and play around with that and get some really cool effects. And finally, on the right hand side, we have this lovely retro style, pin-up style label, and you can see there on the top right of that, whoops, I've clicked on the wrong one. There we go. Just scrolling through. So yeah, initially actually this was the image, and I used some AI to generate that, what the heck. And I put that into Affinity Photo and make it look a little bit more distressed. And as you can see there, again, I'll make this available to you in the description of the video. So there's that part there for the label. Then you have this other part here for the bottle sale label. Now, I should also mention that each of these images, textures, is a square aspect ratio. And I forget now what size these were, but I believe they're 2K or thereabouts. So check them out when you download them. I'm going to show you how I'll just quickly recap the UV mapping for these as well, because they're very straightforward. So what I did was I went to the top view with the label selected, which is that part there, of course, and I tapped into edit mode, selected everything in face mode. So make sure you're in face select in the top left there, or press number 3 on the keyboard, press A as a toggle to select everything, and then press the U key, U for unicorn, and select unwrap, or not unwrap, sorry, select project from view, okay? And don't select bounds because that will make it square. Just make sure it's select project from view. And of course the material, if I show you the material as well, you might be better off first creating the material. Just simply add the image there. That's all you need to do initially. Don't worry about all the rest of it for now. Simply add your image node into your shader and plug it into your base color. just to start with. After that, you can start recreating this in this way, and I'll show you that in more detail later on. So just to recap, make the material first, drop your image in, and the reason I'm saying or suggesting do it in that order is because the image is square, so when you unwrap it, the aspect ratio of the unwrap will be correct when it comes to actually applying those UVs to the image. If you do it after the fact, you may have to unwrap it again to make sure it's not stretched or squashed. Excuse me. So anyway, that's what I did for the UVs, and the same applies. Let's go back to object mode, and if I go to the underside and select this little, I'll show you what these are later on. If you select this label thing, I press 7 and then Control 7 to flip to the underside. Tab into edit mode. Same principle. You want to unwrap this before you rotate it as well. So, excuse me. So you can see there we've got some slight rotation of 5 degrees on the Z axis. If I zero that out, you can see I modeled this in this orientation from the top view or bottom view, whichever way you like. And you then UV unwrapped it. Once you've done all of that and applied the material, and then you can rotate it to its final position, basically. Okay, so the same thing as the label, just a straightforward project from view, and that will be fine. And it uses the same texture as that. Right, so the other one is the control panel here, or whatever you want to call this. So this one, it's the same principle. Go to the top view, select just the faces. In fact, you can probably use, I think I selected just the ones within that circle there. So you can see I have there should be a seam here. I'm not sure if there is, but I can't really see it because of the crease, but there should be a seam there. And that isolates this area in the top. And I just projected it from the top view again. Very straightforward. So if we go to UV editing and I select the appropriate image, which is the decals, it's just select all the faces there. That's not quite right, is it? That's because I've got the wrong material selected, perhaps. No, let me just figure that out for a second down. So we've got the decals, which is that one here. And let's see if it does it. No, it does not. Well, that's weird. Let me just select these faces here by pressing L for linked. And for some reason they're over there, even though they look fine in the model. How strange is that? What is going on? You can see there it's applied correctly. Anyway, regardless, I feel really stupid now. So if I select these again with L and do project from view from the top, just to show you what I won't save this, but I'll just show you what it should look like. I don't know why it's looking like that. If I select these, press L, I selected more, haven't I? Select L, press L to select those, press U to unwrap from view. In fact, we can select bounds here. Just do that because it is a square and it's a circle. So you get that. And now you can just simply select everything on the left side by pressing A, S for scale, and doing that. And again, I'm not really sure why the albedo is not changing. I'm going to undo all that because I've probably messed it up. The other materials are procedural, pretty much. Now again, they look a bit complicated, and you could argue they maybe are. But once I show you the breakdown of what each of these zones are doing, you'll notice that these are not complicated. That might be a bit much, but I'm not going to take you through all of this. I simply adapted this from many things that I saw on the internet and tests and trial and error. So I found this worked for this particular model, so I went with that. And again, I'll show you all of these and more at the end of the video, where you can take screen grabs or pause the video and take a screen grab and just save these for your own model and use them on other models as well. It's not just on this one it would work on any model you like, really. And yeah, let me go through each material next. I'll start off with the most basic ones first, and that's going to be the metallic material, which I've applied to the screws on the top and on the underside as well. Very straightforward ones, these ones. You can see there we've got the screws, and this is what the material looks like for that. Let me just make that full screen and I'll take you through it. Again, I've broken these up into two distinct groups just to make it easier to illustrate what these are doing and why they're like that essentially. So the first one you can see is the base color, and that plugs directly into the principled BSDF base color slot. So let's just have a quick look at that. And I'm using ambient occlusion node with these settings. Again, I'll show you these at the end of the video. We've got a base color, which is the the color ramp. So you can see there I've crushed the blacks right to the right on the right hand side, and that is that. And then I've added an RGB node here, and I've selected this color here. So essentially that's going to be the color of the ambient occlusion, basically, i.e. all those areas that are in the nooks and crannies and the recesses of the model. That's where you're going to have this color. So if I just come out of full screen and let's go to the top view, we can see that a bit more clearly, I should say. Let's focus in on this one here. Let's isolate that actually. Nice. Let's leave it like that because we need ambient occlusion to work. You can almost see a sense of that brown, this color within the recesses of that model. So if I Control Shift and click this, you need Node Wrangler enabled, by the way, to enable Control Shift and left click on a node to preview just the node you've clicked on. So enable that in the preferences. You can see there, this is the effect we're having from the ambient occlusion node, which I've adjusted with the color ramp. So if I mute that, that's what it looks like by default. And if I enable this again by pressing the M key to unmute it, you can see I've crunched the blacks to give it more strength, essentially. So that would be the default, and I wanted more of that inner dirt, I guess, and that's what that does. And that's plugged into the factor, which essentially works as a mask between this and that, or sorry, this and this one. So the RGB and the noise texture. So this is our mask essentially, the ambient occlusion, and this one. I'll plug that into the factor, which is the mask essentially. So what's the other node here? Well, this one, remember we're using a mixed color node here. So I've got a noise texture node here with a mapping and texture coordinates, and I'm using the object, which is really important. I tend to use this 99% of the time. Generated tends to look somewhat distorted and not as nice. So object is the one that I tend to use. So plug that into the mapping, and that of course into the vector of the noise texture. And you can play around with the details there. And if I do Control Shift and click, this is what the noise texture looks like that I'm using. Oops, I've zoomed in too much. It's clipped through the camera. That's what that looks like there. Now again, I should add, is you can also add a color ramp. I can just duplicate this from the Shift D, drop it there. You can see we can now make that effect, that noise texture, stronger or more prominent, give it more contrast by doing that if you want to do that. So I'll let you play around with that. It's pretty cool. But I'm going to take that out, just delete that and leave it as it was. And essentially the possibilities are endless here. But anyway, this is what the base color is. Ambient occlusion and an RGB node, and then a noise texture mixed together. And that's essentially what that is. Further down, we have this group, which is, as you can see, it says bump. And that is, again, very straightforward. We've got a noise texture using the object coordinates, going through a color ramp, and that's plugged through a bump node. It's very important you plug that into the height, not the normal. Otherwise, it won't really look good. And I've turned the strength down quite a lot here. In fact, this looks like 0. It's not. It's 0.0001. And a good tip, this one, is this isn't like the distance is essentially relative to the units that you're using within Blender. So if we head over to here on the scene properties, you've got units here, and these are in metric at the moment. And I've got the length set to meters. Yours might be set to something else like centimeters or inches or whatever, if you have it set to imperial. But the point is, if it's 1 meter, this would be 0.0001 of a meter. So that would be the depth of the bump by default if that was set to 1. Normally people would leave that at 1, so it'd be 1 meter deep, which is crazy for this screw. And then people just turn down the strength. And that does work, but it's not as accurate as actually giving it some depth like that and then changing the strength if you want less obvious bump. So that's what I did there, and that goes straight into the normal slot just there. So that's it for the metal, pretty straightforward. Let's have a look at something else now. Next we'll look at the case itself, and the case is that part there. That's the bulk of the object, and there's the material for that. I've called it case. You can see there on the left, and I've got the object named case as well. Let me make that full screen as well, and I'll talk you through what this is doing. So if we start from the right, as we always have our material output there, now normally you would see a principled BSDF node there, which is probably that one there I started with. And I started with this essentially. So again, a nice texture, mapping and texture coordinates using the object as the vector. Very straightforward and simple. I've added a bump node to that, and the bump node is fed through this edgeware breakdown. So it's quite a complex breakdown. Again, I won't take you through all of this. We'll try to explain how this all works. Essentially, it's using a noise texture. You can see a color ramp, goes through a map range for more control, and 2 bevel nodes, and that goes into a color mix node set to difference, and those 2 bevel nodes are plugged into A and B, sockets A and B. Then that goes through a color ramp again. It's actually quite quite clamped in there, or squashed I should say. We've got 3 nodes in there. The one on the left is white, the next one along is black, and this one is also black. And I've set the interpolation to B-spline, and that makes it a lot smoother. And that's plugged into this color mix node again, set to subtract. So the top row of nodes are plugged into the A socket there, and on the bottom we have again a noise texture, very straightforward, going through a color ramp, standard stuff, and that's plugged into the B socket. And the factor, default is 0.5. This is set all the way to 1. And the subtract essentially is saying, hey, take away B from A, right, with a full strength. That's what that's doing. I've probably not explained that as well as I would have liked, but that's essentially what it's doing. You can see there, if I move that a little bit, you can see we have this node that's also coming out of there. If I just grab that and move it, probably that's a bit nicer actually. And move that there. Oops. Shame you can't click and drag these. Let's just do that. Anyway, that also goes into this mix node over here. And that is, if you remember from the last time with the screw, this is the factor, and it's essentially the mask. So think of it as in something in Photoshop or Affinity. That would be your mask selection there. So that's what I'm using the edgeware for. And the reason we're using that as a mask is because we want to show 2 materials. One of them is the base metal. So what do I mean by that? And if you think about something like this, or something that you might own at home, I don't know what it could be, I don't know, some device. There's normally a base material that it's manufactured with, in this case, metallic material, and then it's covered on top with something else. It may be a paint or a lacquer or something like that, or whatever. So this is why I've made 2 materials for that. So the first one is the metal, the base metal underneath, and that's using a nice texture and a bump node again. So that's going into a principled BSDF. You can see the values there. And also I should also mention the specular. If it's using metallic set to 1, this is 0.5, the value by default. Change that to 1 if it's metallic, that tends to help. And also have that selected to multi-scatter GGX. Gives you much better results than the standard GGX option. So there's that. And that's plugged into, again, this mix shader node in the top slot there. So that's our first material, really simple material. And then we've got the second one, which is the coating. That's what I've called that there. So we've got a base color made up, again, of ambient occlusion, going through a color ramp. You can see that looks the same as the metal one that I showed you earlier. And again, that's going through 2 RGB nodes this time. One set to the ambient occlusion color, which is that kind of rustic brown dirt color. Then we have this almost, in fact it is pure white, no, just short of pure white there. And here's the RGBs if you want to see that. And here's the hex. But the hex is broken. I don't know why it does this. I think that's meant to be like that. I'm not sure. But it's a slightly off-white value anyway. Yeah, you can see there we have slightly less blue. Either way, that's plugged into a mix color node with the blending mode set to mix. And again, the ambient occlusion is our mask between these two colors, and that's plugged into the factor. And that's going into this principled BSDF as the base color. And once more, like the metallic material for the screws, we have the bump node group. Basically the same thing as the other one. Same thing, going through a color ramp, and that's plugged into a bump node. There's my distance setting and my strength, and that plugs into the normal there. So just to recap, we've got our base material, the metal, we've got our coating, we have our edge wear as a mask to blend between these two. And the result of that is what you see there. So the edge wear is all of this stuff here. So these nodes will be controlling what part of the metal is showing compared to the coating. So if you want to have less edge wear or no edge wear at all, obviously you wouldn't see the metal. Just take that away, unplug this, and just plug that directly into the material output if you want to. So if you only want just this one, for example, just plug that directly into there, and you only have that a nice clean new product look as opposed to a worn and used object. So let's have a quick look at this, how this works. Not works so much, but to see the effect really. So if I change the value of this to say 50, you can see the noise texture there on the wear and tear. And remember, this is a mask. It's not anything else. It's just a mask between these two shaders. So we can control how much of that we want to show through from the metal compared to the top. So let's put that back to 25. And you can see that if I change that, you can see the effect like that. Now that's one, there seems to be two noise textures here. And the other one is coming from over here. So if we change this one, you can see that changes the other one there. So you've got small wear and tear and a larger value. Not much in it. This one's 30 of a scale. That one's set to 25. But gives it more variety, and that's cool. So that's how that works. Feel free to play with that as much as you like. And also you can play around with these color ramps and change how that works. You can see there, now we see a lot more of the metal, less of the coating, just by doing that, like that. In fact, we can get rid of a lot of it just by doing this. So yeah, play around with that, it's good fun. Leave that like that. That takes care of the base, the main bulk of it anyway. All the other ones, like this one here, the slider, if I select the slider now, I simply copied that material, duplicated it. You can see it's exactly the same structure, and I just renamed it and called it slider and changed some of the values to make it work for this object. So let me just quickly zoom in on that. So the base color is different here because we don't have this rustic brown or, sorry, cream color and all these things. We have this grayscale, very dark gray, you can see there. And we have this slightly off-white color again, just there. And those are going through a mixed color node, and the ambient occlusion is once more acting as the mask between these two, just there. And that's plugged into the base color of material 2. Material 1, that should be there, is again just a noise texture, base color, a normal map, which is coming from the edge wear. And that's it. That's plugged into a mix shader to mix these two nodes. And this is acting as our mask between these two materials. So again, I'm not going to go through it all in great detail. I'm sure that will put you to sleep by now, including me. But just know that if you made this one, you can just duplicate that. And if it works for you, great. Just change the colors and you've now got your metallic slider look and feel. Right, so that takes care of the base, the screws, the slider. The decal one, for the controls, sorry, I call this controls. Let's make that full screen. You already saw that I've got an image used here. And here's that image. If I just Control Shift and click that. There's our PNG file applied to that object there. In fact, the reason I think yeah, you can see that's why it didn't work, because I didn't have the correct UV map selected, because we want a different UV map for the decals compared to the standard. Look, let me just see if I can explain that a bit better. So the decals need to have the UVs from the texture coordinates for the mapping, which makes absolute sense because you want to map that using the UVs, right? So if I go now to UV editing now, and I go to select the control details UV group, I made the UV map, I created a new one there by clicking the plus button, and then I named it control details, and that's when I did the UV unwrap with that new one selected. So that's what that one is there. Let's get rid of the one I just made. So if I click back on this one again, you can see the unwrap was actually correct, and I just unwrapped the whole thing from the top, not just the one in the middle or in the center that I showed you earlier. So very straightforward unwrap. You can see the image in the background there is the decals image just there. So that's really straightforward. The other one is just called unwrapped, and this one is, I don't know if I even used this one. That's used like this, but I don't think I used it because the decals, let's go back to the final output. Let's turn that one off and turn that off. Sorry, I turned the other one off. Right, so anyway, this does look complicated, doesn't it? But I assure you, it's really not that bad. Okay, let's cover the bump thing first, the bump on this one. I've got 2 levels of bump noise, I've called it. So a quick look at that. So here's our first set of noise. Let's select these ones. Here's our first set of noise nodes. Here's a second set. I just duplicated the top one and made some changes between the two. This one, for example, has a scale of 300, has a scale of 45. So this one's a lot finer than this one. That's a broad bump. This one's a very fine bump. You can see the color ramps. And I've mixed those together using a subtract blending mode, factor set to 1, and those are plugged in there. And that goes into a bump node again, which plugs into the normal of this bump node, because we have, remember I showed you earlier, if I go back to the images, we also have this image in the middle, which is the normal map I created from when I made this. So let's get back to Blender. So this is the one that I'm loading here. So this is the one that goes into another bump node, and this one goes into the height. That might need to go in there, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, that one should maybe go in there, this one can go in there, but it should be the same thing, so I don't worry too much about it. So yeah, that's what that is. That's UV unwrapped, of course, otherwise it wouldn't work. And don't forget to change this to non-color data, color space I should say, non-color, because it doesn't have any color information. It's a normal map. So that's, otherwise if you don't do that and it's set to RGB or something else, it will look terrible and it won't work. So make sure you have that set to non-color for your normal maps. It's really important. Cool. So we've got 2 normal maps here. Bump stuff. We've got one for the normal, for the decals, for the recesses and all that stuff. We've got a generic bump, which I've mixed 2 together. You don't have to have 2, just do with 1, no problem at all. That goes through a bump node, add another bump node, plug that one into that one into that one. And you can change the distance there and change the strength if you want to. And that goes into the node just there, the normal on the principled BSDF. Okay, that covers that. Then we have a roughness group. You can see the same thing again, rinse and repeat, a noise texture with these values, pretty standard stuff. Set to object this time, not UV, because we don't want the UVs for that. And then I've got the color ramp there to control the strength. And a quick reminder, a white color, that shouldn't probably be with full white, but it is what it is. A full white color means matte finish, no roughness at all. So very matte and rough. Going towards the black end of the spectrum, that gives us a very mirror-like finish. So if that were black, and if I go back to our control wheel there, I don't know if you can make it out. But now you can see the HDR is very reflective on our surface there. You can see that's the HDR with the forest. If I change that to, say, this one, you can see there that's coming through to some degree just there. So making that black will give you a mirror finish if that's what you want, chrome finish if you like, but that's too strong for me, so I'm going to bring that back down to roughly where it was. Up to you where you want to put that, just to control the roughness there. Okay, let's go back to the overall look and feel of this material node setup. This is our roughness, and here's our base color. So again, starting from the top, I've got an ambient occlusion through a color ramp, another RGB node, and then they're mixed together with this group. This is where the decals come in. This is the one with the colors, right? So you can see that I've got the UVs, and that's going through to this. Of course, that's RGB, going to a mixed node, and that's plugged into the factor, because that's the alpha channel of that PNG file. I'm using that as a mask. And then the color of that is going to slot B, and this noise texture is going into slot A. So that will mix these two together. If I just quickly show you what that looks like. Just zoom in here. Let's get a bit more space. So here's our object there, our decals object, which is that image there in the left. Remember, it's a PNG file with a transparency channel, alpha channel, which is why we can use this one here into the factor. And that makes it invisible. That's where you get the black when you look at it like this here. And then we have the noise texture, which is doing that. So it's quite fine and rough looking. And you can see there, the alpha channel is doing its work. That's the factor. And if I unplug that, so all the way to 1 is giving us just this. And the alpha is coming through as black. If I go all the way to the left, it's giving us just the noise texture. If we go halfway, you're going to get exactly that, 50-50. But if you go to 1, and then we plug this back in to the alpha as the factor, not 1, doesn't need to be 1, sorry. Plug the alpha into that. We can now see through the alpha and show underneath the noise texture. Hope you get that. And of course that's going through and mixing again with the ambient occlusion set up there. And that goes into the base color of our principal BSDF, and that's plugged into our material output. So all together, we have our bump nodes. Again, just have 1 if you want to. Don't need to have 2. I've got the one that I made manually, which is the image for the recesses you can see there. Again, don't have to do that, but feel free to use it if you want. And then I have the roughness and the base color. So there's that. Next, I'll quickly show you the component just between these two parts here. Don't know if you can make that out very clearly, but if I switch to solid mode, you've got this part here on the right, which is the label and all the other stuff. If I just move that out of the way there. Then you have the base part here, but in between those you have a gap. And inside there we have this object here. If I isolate that with the / question mark key, you can see that all that is that bit there. And all I've done there is copied the base material. If you remember that from the case there, which is this one here, the case we kind of started off with after the screw. I copied that, renamed it, and then I changed the color from that creamy white, off-white, to the orange. So if I go back to rendered mode, switch back to the forest view, why not? You can see there, that's the orange with the wear and tear applied to it. So that doesn't take any effort at all. Once you've made one, you simply copy it and just change the colors. And if you want some of the wear and tear values. So that's the inner piece. Or you don't need to use that at all. You can actually just use the, if you want to use the screw material in that, you're not going to see that. So you're more than, free to apply whatever material you like in there. Right, after that we have the label large. If I press G to grab it, I've already shown you how that works. That's UV unwrapped and applied the image to it. And in fact, I haven't shown you that, have I? Let's just go through that now. So here's the labels material. Here's our image, which is the one that I showed you earlier. A quick reminder of what that looks like. And that's that one here on the right. So you've got the lady and you have the bottle caps symbol there. So that's what I've loaded into that image here. sRGB, of course, UV unwrap as the texture coordinates. And that's mixed again with ambient occlusion setup that I showed you several times by now. So you should be familiar with that. Go through a mix node, and there you have that. This one down here I didn't use, but I left it there for some reason. Just ignore that. That shouldn't really be there. So basically we have just the image and the ambient occlusion just there. And those are mixed together with this color mix node. Right, then we have a roughness setup. Once more we have the texture coordinates set to object, and that's a noise texture going through a color ramp, very similar to the controls one we saw earlier, down here or up here somewhere. There it is. Very similar to that. I probably just copied it to get that done. So I just copied those groups there. So yeah, that's the roughness, just a noise texture through a color ramp into the roughness slot. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's the label. Label is small, essentially the same thing. You can see there I used the same material basically, because that one's called labels. If I click the label underneath, that's also called labels. And all that's using is a separate part of the image. Because if you remember, we have this part over in the top right, which is just for that part there. So when we UV unwrap it, that's where you're going to assign your UVs, and the label UVs will be in this area. So I hope that's straightforward. Hopefully it is. Media case, this is the orange part. Let me just move that over here. So this one is essentially a copy of the base material of this one here that I showed you earlier. So I copied that and changed it to orange. In fact, that's the one I applied to, I just realized, that's the one I applied on the inside of the that little gasket thing there, or whatever that is. That's what I applied to that as well. So yeah, this is what I used for that, and that was a copy of this one, just changed the color to orange. Let's move that back to where it was. I'll just undo that. There we go. What's next? Screw. We've covered the screw material, the screw slide, sorry, screw side. That's the one here. Same material as the screws material I took you through earlier. Screw star, same material. Slider, we've already covered that. Stub. Now this is the one at the bottom of the case. And again, as you can see there, I've used the media case new material. The same one I've used on this one, I applied to that one. That works fine. Then we have the text. Now this gets interesting now, because I'm going to show you something that I've never used before. I think it's a great technique. So I'll show you that next. Right, let's talk about something which I think is really interesting. Now you may have noticed in my outliner, I've got these objects called AO caster, 1, 2, right through to 10. You can just see there. If I select them here and move them, this is what these are. If I just undo that, switch to solid mode, and you'll notice that we have these weird looking intersections and planes floating around the object. There's nothing special about these. These are literally just planes. If I tab into edit mode, you can see you just got some faces there. So if I duplicate that, move it over here, maybe bring it closer, just above the surface, and I'll switch back to object mode. And now I tab onto rendered mode. You can see there, that looks really dirty now over there. If I tab into edit mode, let's just move that along like that. If I scale it up, you can see the effect that's having on the model. But we don't see these objects being rendered. And the simple answer for that is simply because if I head over to the object data for this object, this could be one object, by the way. All of these can be just one object if you want to. If I select that object again, head over to the object data properties and open up visibility, you can see I've turned off the camera, diffuse, glossy, transmission. And I'm not sure if that was on by default, but that's off anyway. The only thing I've left on is shadow. So this only casts a shadow, but we can't see it. And I don't want a shadow from the light. That's really important. And the reason for that is because it looks ridiculous. You can't just have lights from the shadows from the lights, seemingly from nowhere, invisible objects, just wouldn't look right. What I wanted was ambient occlusion, grunge, if you like. So what I had to do there is, on the material, so I should explain also, the reason this is actually appearing at all on the actual surface of the models is because this material, that's why I've used it. This explains a lot actually. There is method to my madness, I assure you. That's the reason why I've been using ambient occlusion on all of the materials. So on this one here you can see ambient occlusion. If I click on the label, ambient occlusion with the color there, we select this one, ambient occlusion, you get the drill. Ambient occlusion is everywhere. And that's because without these nodes, we wouldn't get this effect. So if we wouldn't have this effect going on with these objects. Okay, so what I love about this is that you can make these objects any shape, size you like, and you can, as you saw there, if I select that face again, the closer you are, and remember this is ambient occlusion, so this is what we're controlling here by placing these faces. The further away from the object, the more subtle the ambient occlusion will become. So you can see we have like a burn mark there now across the object, which looks really nice. So let's go back to that. So by bringing that closer to the object, it becomes, the ambient occlusion obviously becomes much, much stronger. So you can start making shapes with it. And that's exactly what I did. As I discovered this, let me just delete that face. What I decided to do, so you can actually kind of air quotes cheat. See these parts here? These are not textures. These are actually geometry using the same principle. So I put two tiny triangles. If I tap into edit mode, you can see this is just a face. It's actually a quad. Whoops. Select that like that. Yeah, it's just a quad, which I've tapered on one end, scaled down. And by putting it very close to the object surface, you can see we get this, for deselected, you can see we get this kind of burn mark, essentially, on the object case. Now if I move that away, yes, you guessed it, that becomes more diffused, because now light is getting inside that area between this and this. So yeah, I thought that was a great way of doing some details and decals on your model without actually using a texture map or anything else. It's purely using a ambient occlusion trick, essentially. So let me bring that back out to where it was roughly. Well, that looking a little bit more smooth, not so sharp, like that. Maybe that's too blurry, but you get the idea. You can move that in as close as you want to make that more clear. So that was a nice little touch. And then I thought, hey, in a minute, if that works for that, then it would work for text, right? Yes, it does. Here's some text. So you can see there in my outline now, I've got a text object. And if I type into edit mode, it's standard text. So I can just type enter and say, hello, world. And please subscribe. Oops, you can't read that. Maybe I didn't type that correctly. Go back to object mode. If I move that over here, you can see now it says property of 42, subscribe. Yay. By the way, if you're not, please do. Really helps the channel out. And I need more subscribers, guys. Please help me. Right, so yeah, you can see that works really, really well. So just delete that copy. You can place that anywhere you like because it's just an object. It's a text object. So like any text object, you can go into your fonts and change to a different font. So for example, if I delete the one that I selected there, the freestyle script, if I delete that, it goes back to its default font. And there we have, scale it down, move it along. And by placing that closer to the object, not there, overlapping the corner, but bring it into a space like this, the sharper the text becomes on the object surface. Again, it's a really cool way of getting some decals on your model. And I've not seen this technique used anywhere else. So trademark pending, you saw it here first, guys. What I didn't explain, foolishly, is we don't want these objects to cast shadows, as I said, right? Because if you go back to the object data properties, we only have shadow turned on. So we can turn that off. If we turn that off, you see we no longer get the effect of the ambient occlusion, even though our text is still there. You can see it's still there, but we're not getting that effect anymore. That's because we turned off shadow. I find that a bit weird. I don't know why it would do that, even though, well, I guess it makes sense really. If I click on shadow, now you are seeing the ambient occlusion, not actually a shadow. So it's a little bit tricky to understand, but just know that it doesn't work if you turn off shadow. That's all I know. Can't explain why, but that's what I found. And the reason we don't see a shadow is because I've used a light path on the AO caster, ambient occlusion caster, that's what that means. And I've used the light path node, and I've said here, if it's a shadow ray, make it transparent. That's the trick. So if I unplug that, and I select this text and see if this works, if I move it up, you can kind of see we've got the ambient occlusion, but we're also getting shadows. Let's switch to a different HDRI. Like that. Now, yeah, you can see it there. So you've got this kind of double vision effect going on there. We've got a shadow somewhere and the ambient occlusion. The shadow is quite subtle, but you can make it out just there. That's being cast from the light from this room. Let's find another stronger example. Maybe this one here, the studio. Yeah, so you can see there, the studio lights are creating this shadow. But if we plug this in, that shadow now disappears, because if it's a shadow ray, make it transparent. That's what we've said on the material. So the only thing now visible is the ambient occlusion that this is creating just by being in close proximity to these materials, which have an ambient occlusion component to them, basically. So again, I think this is a really nice technique and it works really well. The only downside is you can't change, for example, if you wanted to change the color of the text here, which looks like it's on the surface of that object. Say you wanted to make that orange, you can't, because the ambient occlusion is driven by this value here. So if I was to change this value and make it very bright and make it maybe a pink color, it not only changes the color of the text, in quotes, the text there, but it also changes the ambient occlusion all over the object. So it's not a per object, a per object ambient occlusion, because this is the target, this is the source of the ambient occlusion that's causing it. So unfortunately, it is what it is. So let's go back to more of an orangey brown. So not so saturated, something like that. Anyway, something like that anyway. But that gives you that color there. So yeah, that's a really neat trick. And I used that all over the model. So let's have a quick look at where I've used it. So here I've placed these faces right in the middle of that gap that I showed you earlier. So if I switch to solid mode, you can see they're in that area there. Go back to rendered mode. Let's find a better HDRI, back to our forest one. And if I move this up, you can see our ambient occlusion becomes stronger because we have a lot more light blocking from this area and a lot less underneath now. But if I was to move this down again, we now have the effect underneath and also at the top if you put it halfway through. So that's what I did there. If you like, you can place them differently. Maybe keep these at the bottom and put some other ones on the top. Make these smaller. Literally do whatever you like and it works really, really well. So we've got that lot there. We've got these ones over here doing the same thing. So we've got that kind of grungy recessed area there. Then I made these really long, thin ones as well. If I go back to rendered mode, you can see there we have this kind of dirt area. Very subtle. But if I bring this down, move it there, you You see how much stronger that gets. And now we have something like that. So again, really cool effect. If I duplicate that and maybe bring it over here, rotate it on the Z. I've messed that up, have I? No, I haven't. Move that over here. We now get a totally different ambient occlusion across the object like that. So it's really cool. Love that. You've got so much control over the strength of the ambient occlusion just by placing it away. Now do make sure, before I forget to mention it, if we select this object, which is an empty, and I've parented everything, so you can see there in my outliner, I've got an empty which I've renamed to Holotape group, and all of my objects are parented to that empty. And the reason for that is because if we move this, obviously everything's going to go with it, including the ambient occlusion objects. Otherwise it's going to float in different spaces and the illusion will be broken. So just make sure you have that all grouped together nicely. So there you have it. Love that technique, and if that makes me a millionaire, fantastic. I hope it does. I doubt it will though. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that. That's all the materials that I've got for you. Next I'm going to show you the screenshots of all the materials that I've used there, including the casters there. So I'd love to see what you think of this. Leave a comment. If you do use it in your own projects and it's online somewhere, leave a comment in the on the video, and I would really like to check that out. I'd love to see if you're using this technique and what you do with it. Probably better stuff than I can. So yeah, anyway, onwards and upwards. I'll show you the screenshots. Pause the video there if you want to replicate them, and make sure you download the images in the description. So with that said, I'll leave it there for the voiceover. All that's left for me to say is thanks ever so much for watching. I hope you've stuck around to the end. I hope it was worth it and you learned something today. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. It means a lot to me and really helps me, well, YouTube, get the videos out to more people. Right, enough waffling. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.